The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with excited whispers. Representatives from dozens of alien species filled the curved rows of seats, their various forms creating a colorful display of galactic diversity. At the center podium, Council Prime Velthara raised her forearms to call for silence. "We are here today to vote on Motion 4751, she announced, her voice echoing through the vast space. The removal of humanity from the Galactic Council. In the human section, Ambassador Minho Kim sat perfectly still. His dark eyes moved slowly across the chamber, watching as alien faces turned toward him with mixtures of curiosity, satisfaction, and a few showing what might have been regret. Minho had expected this day would come. The signs had been building for months. The hegemony representative, Zethkar, stood up from his crystal throne. His body gleamed like polished diamond in the chamber's artificial light. "The humans have proven themselves unfit for membership in our great alliance," he declared. "They refuse to follow proper procedures. They ignore established protocols. They think they can solve everything with their primitive methods." Several other representatives nodded in agreement. The Zelthani delegate clicked his mandibles approvingly. The Thelonian minister waved her tentacles in what Minho knew was their version of applause. "They are disorganized," continued another voice from the crowd. "They question our decisions. They suggest changes to systems that have worked perfectly for thousands of years." Minho almost smiled at that. The humans had indeed suggested many changes. They had pointed out inefficiencies in the Council's trade networks. They had proposed simpler solutions to complex problems. They had shown other species how to repair equipment using basic tools instead of replacing entire systems. But apparently, this had made them troublemakers. "The vote will now commence," announced Velthara, "all in favor of expelling humanity from the Galactic Council." One by one, the representatives pressed their voting devices. The chamber filled with soft beeping sounds as the votes were recorded. Minho watched the display screen above the podium. The numbers climbed steadily. Red lights appeared next to species names, indicating votes for expulsion. Only a few yellow lights appeared, showing abstentions. The Zephyrians had abstained, as Minho had expected. They had worked closely with humans for decades and understood their value. A couple of smaller species also chose not to vote, but they were too few to matter. No green lights appeared. Not a single species voted to keep humanity in the Council. "The motion passes with an overwhelming majority," Velthara announced. "Effective immediately, the human species is expelled from the Galactic Council and stripped of all associated privileges and protections." The chamber erupted in satisfied chatter. Many representatives seemed pleased with themselves. They had finally dealt with the troublesome humans who always asked difficult questions and proposed unwanted solutions. Minho stood slowly. The chamber gradually fell silent as all eyes turned to him. He was a small figure compared to many of the aliens around him, but something in his posture commanded attention. "Very well," he said simply. His voice was calm and clear. "We accept the decision of this council. Humanity will begin immediate withdrawal from all council territories and installations." The Zelthani representative, Theclin, made a sound that might have been laughter. "Surely you don't expect us to believe you'll simply pack up and leave. Where would you go? Your people are scattered across dozens of worlds under council protection. You depend on our technology, our trade networks, our security." Minho turned to face the insect-like alien. For a moment, his calm expression flickered, and something harder showed in his eyes. "Ambassador Theclin, I think you'll find that humans are quite resourceful when it comes to finding new homes. We've done it before." "But you have nowhere to go," insisted another voice from the crowd. "The galaxy beyond council space is dangerous, full of unstable systems, hostile environments, unexplored regions. No civilized species would attempt to settle there." Minho's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Perhaps that's the difference between us and civilized species." He gathered his few belongings from his desk. The human delegation was small compared to others. They had never needed large staffs or complex procedures. 3 advisors, 2 technical specialists, and himself. That was all humanity had required to participate in the governance of a galactic civilization. "How long do you need to evacuate your people?" asked Velthara, perhaps feeling a small twinge of something that might have been guilt. "We'll be gone within the week," Minho replied. Several representatives exchanged glances. That seemed impossibly fast. Most species required months of planning for major relocations. "And the human colonies? Your industrial installations, the research facilities?" pressed Zethkar. "All will be evacuated or shut down as appropriate," Minho said. "We leave nothing behind that we cannot afford to lose." As the human delegation prepared to leave the chamber, Minho paused at the exit. He turned back to address the council one final time. "I want to thank this council for the years we spent working together," he said. "Humanity learned much during our time here. We learned about different ways of thinking, different approaches to problems, different perspectives on the universe." He paused, his gaze moving across the alien faces. "We also learned about ourselves, about what makes us unique, about what we bring to any community we join." He nodded politely. "We wish you all the best in your future endeavors." With that, the human delegation walked out of the Galactic Council chambers for the last time. Behind them, the representatives began discussing the practical matters of human departure, dividing up abandoned territories and resources. None of them noticed the small communication device Minho activated as he left the building. None of them saw the brief message he transmitted to every human settlement across the galaxy. The message contained just 2 words: "Come home." Within hours, something unprecedented began happening across Council space. Human ships started lifting off from every world simultaneously. 3 months had passed since the last human ship disappeared from Council space. At first, most alien species had barely noticed the difference. Life continued as normal across the galaxy's thousands of worlds. Trade flowed, ships moved between systems, and the great machinery of galactic civilization kept turning. But slowly, small problems began to appear. On Kepler Station, the massive orbital trading hub that served as the heart of galactic commerce, Administrator Grextel stared at his morning reports with growing confusion. The numbers didn't make sense. Cargo throughput had dropped by nearly half in just 3 months. Ships were arriving days late. Goods were getting lost in the system. "How is this possible?" he muttered, his 6 eyes scanning the data displays. Kepler Station had operated smoothly for over 200 years. It was the pride of Council engineering, a perfect example of organized efficiency. His assistant, a nervous Thelonian named Velcor, approached with another stack of problem reports. "Sir, we have 17 more cargo holds where the contents don't match the shipping manifests. The automated sorting system keeps malfunctioning, and the docking bay controllers are requesting manual override assistance again." Grextal's tentacles writhed in frustration. "Manual override? The system is fully automated. It should handle everything without manual intervention." "That's what we thought, sir. But the system keeps encountering situations it can't handle. Small variations in ship configurations, unusual cargo arrangements, minor deviations from standard procedures. Before, these issues were resolved quickly, but now what?" Velcor hesitated. "Now they pile up until the entire system crashes and we have to restart everything." For the first time, Grextal began to wonder about something he had never paid attention to before. Velcor, who handled these manual overrides in the past? I believe it was usually the human technicians, sir. They seemed to have a talent for working around system limitations. Grextal felt a cold sensation in his multiple stomachs. He had barely noticed the human workers. They had been quiet, efficient, and unremarkable. He had assumed they were just doing simple maintenance tasks that any species could handle. Across the galaxy, similar realizations were beginning to dawn on other administrators. On the agricultural world of Verdania, the Thelonian farmers were facing their own mystery. The planet fed 12 systems with its massive crop yields, using advanced farming techniques that had been perfected over centuries. But this season's harvest was turning into a disaster. Farmer Kexival stood in his failing grain fields, watching as his crops withered despite perfect growing conditions. The soil chemistry was wrong somehow. The automated fertilizer systems were applying the correct formulas, but the plants were not responding properly. "I don't understand it," he told his neighbor, Thekmar. "The computers say everything is perfect. Temperature, moisture, nutrients, everything according to specifications, but look at this." He pulled up a sickly plant. Its roots were pale and underdeveloped. "These should be twice this size by now." Thekmar nodded grimly. "It's the same across my entire farm. I've run every diagnostic test. The equipment is working perfectly. The soil analysis shows optimal conditions, but something is wrong." An older farmer named Quintel joined their conversation. He had been farming longer than most, back when methods were less automated. "You know," he said slowly, "there used to be a human coordinator who worked with us. Ji-Woo Park, I think her name was." "A human?" Kexval looked surprised. "What did a human know about Thelonian farming techniques?" "More than I realized, apparently," Quintel admitted. "She was always suggesting small changes, adjusting fertilizer timing based on weather patterns that weren't in the computer models, modifying planting depths for different soil conditions, adding trace minerals that the standard formulas didn't include. Those were just primitive additions to our advanced system," Thekmar protested. "Were they?" Quintel asked. "Because I'm remembering now that my yields were consistently higher when I followed her suggestions. I thought it was just coincidence." The three farmers stood in silence, looking at their failing crops. For the first time, they began to wonder if the primitive additions had actually been crucial improvements that their advanced system couldn't function without. Similar conversations were happening on industrial worlds where production lines kept breaking down in ways that the repair manuals didn't cover. On research stations where complex experiments failed because someone needed to make tiny adjustments that weren't in the procedures. On transport ships where cargo had to be rearranged in ways that the standard loading programs couldn't calculate. In No, the council headquarters, a pattern was becoming clear to those who bothered to look. Every department that had employed human workers was now experiencing problems. Not dramatic failures, but a steady accumulation of small inefficiencies and unexpected complications. Dr. Kithara, the council's chief xenopsychologist, was one of the first to recognize what was happening. She had been studying the reports from across council space, looking for connections. "It's fascinating," she told her research team. "The humans weren't just doing simple jobs. They were acting as a kind of adaptive interface between our rigid systems and the chaotic reality of actual operations." Her assistant, a young Zelthani, named Rixtel, looked confused. "What do you mean, adaptive interface?" "Our species design perfect systems," Dr. Kithara explained. "We create procedures that work flawlessly under ideal conditions, but reality is never ideal. There are always unexpected variations, special circumstances, unusual problems that don't fit the standard solutions." She pulled up data from Kepler Station on her screen. "Look at this. The cargo handling system is designed to process standardized containers using predetermined routes. It works perfectly when everything matches the specifications. But when a ship arrives with slightly different container sizes, or when unusual weather affects docking procedures, or when cargo needs special handling, the system doesn't know what to do. So it stops working?" "Exactly. It stops working and waits for someone to tell it what to do. In the past, humans would step in and find solutions. They would figure out how to make the unusual situation work within the existing system. They would bend the rules in ways that somehow made everything function better." Rixtel was beginning to understand. "So when we removed the humans, we removed the part of our civilization that could adapt to change," Dr. Kithara finished. "We kept all the rigid systems, but we lost the flexibility that made them actually work in the real world." The implications were starting to become clear. The Galactic Council had not simply expelled a troublesome member species. They had amputated a vital part of their own civilization's ability to function, and this was only the beginning. 6 months after the humans vanished, the problems had grown from small cracks into gaping wounds across galactic civilization. In the Meridian sector, once the most prosperous region in Council space, Space Traffic Controller Nexivar stared at his screens in panic. Three cargo ships hung motionless in space, their automated navigation systems completely confused. A passenger liner was stuck in orbit around a mining station because its docking computer couldn't figure out how to approach the station's slightly modified docking port. "This is impossible," Nexvar muttered, his clawed fingers dancing across the control panel. "The navigation network has operated flawlessly for decades." His supervisor, an elderly hegemony crystal named Zorthek, floated over to examine the situation. "What seems to be the problem?" "Everything," Nexvar replied helplessly. "The ships are following their programmed routes perfectly, but they can't handle the smallest deviations. A solar storm shifted some navigation beacons by a few degrees last week. The automatic correction systems should have compensated, but instead they're just confused." Zorthek examined the data. The ship's computers were indeed working exactly as designed. They were following precise calculations and established protocols. But when faced with tiny variations in expected conditions, they simply stopped and waited for instructions. "Contact the ships directly," Zorthek commanded. "Give them manual navigation assistance." "I've tried," Nexvar said, "but I don't know how to calculate flight paths around modified beacon positions. The computer should handle that automatically." For the first time, Zorthek began to remember something he had ignored for years. There used to be human technicians in the navigation center. They had always seemed to be doing minor tasks, making small adjustments, handling special cases. He had assumed they were just backup personnel for routine maintenance. Now he realized they had been solving problems that the main systems couldn't handle. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Velthera was discovering her own version of the same crisis. The Council's primary research facility on Nexus Prime was experiencing a cascade of equipment failures. "The quantum resonance chamber is offline again," reported her assistant, bringing the daily list of problems. "The molecular synthesizer produced the wrong compounds in 3 separate experiments, and the gravity manipulation system keeps fluctuating." Dr. Velthera was baffled. "These are our most advanced instruments. They've been maintained according to exact specifications." "The maintenance logs show everything was done correctly," her assistant confirmed. "All procedures followed, all parts replaced on schedule, all calibrations completed." "Then why aren't they working?" Her assistant hesitated. "I checked the historical records. Most of these machines worked much more reliably when we had human technicians involved in their maintenance." "Humans?" Dr. Velthera was surprised. "What could primitive humans contribute to our advanced technology?" "I'm not sure, but the records show they often made small modifications to standard procedures, adjustments that weren't in the official manuals." Dr. Velthera felt a growing unease. She pulled up the maintenance records from 2 years ago, when human technician Hee-Jin Lee had worked in her lab. The same equipment that was now failing had worked perfectly then, despite being older. "Look at this," she told her assistant, pointing to an entry in the logs. Hee-Jin modified the calibration sequence for the quantum chamber. She added a 15-second delay between steps that isn't in the manufacturer's instructions. Why would she do that? I don't know. But look at the performance data. The chamber operated at 97% efficiency with her modification. Now, following the official procedure, we're getting only 73% efficiency. The pattern was everywhere. Human technicians had made thousands of tiny improvements to standard procedures, adjustments that seemed insignificant but somehow made everything work better. Now those modifications were forgotten, and the equipment was reverting to basic performance levels that weren't sufficient for the complex demands of galactic civilization. Meanwhile, Dr. Kithera was publishing her second report on the human exodus. This one was far more alarming than her first. "We have fundamentally misunderstood human psychology," she wrote. "Every other species in the Council seeks predictability and clear procedures. We design systems that work perfectly under controlled conditions. Humans, however, seem to thrive in uncertainty." She included examples from across the galaxy. Human engineers who could repair quantum drives using spare parts from completely different systems. Human doctors like Sujin Choi, who could treat alien physiology despite having no formal training in xenobiology. Human traders who could navigate complex cultural barriers that left other diplomats confused for weeks. The critical difference, Dr. Cathara concluded, is that humans think in terms of solutions while most species think in terms of procedures. The economic data accompanying her report was devastating. Trade between council worlds had contracted by 60%. The humans had been the merchants who could talk to anyone, who understood that business was about more than exchanging goods. They somehow knew what different species actually needed, even when those species couldn't explain it clearly themselves. In the military sector, Admiral Zorthek was facing his own crisis. Council defense forces were struggling with equipment, integration problems that had never existed before. The Zeltani ships can't communicate properly with hegemony fighters, reported his tactical officer. Their systems are compatible in theory, but there are constant glitches during joint operations. How is that possible? Admiral Zorthek demanded. We've been conducting joint exercises for decades. I checked the records, sir. Most successful joint operations had human coordinators involved. They seemed to translate between different systems somehow. Admiral Zorthek remembered Commander Tai-Min Han, a human officer who had served on his staff. Tai-Min had an uncanny ability to make mismatched equipment work together. He could somehow get Thelonian sensors to interface with Zeltani computers, or coordinate attacks between species whose communication protocols were completely different. Tai-Min didn't just follow standard procedures, the Admiral admitted to himself. He understood the intent behind the procedures. He could break the rules in ways that made everything work better. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The Council had expelled the one species that could bridge the gaps between their rigid, perfect systems and the messy, unpredictable reality of actual operations. Without humans, galactic civilization was becoming like a beautiful machine with all its gears perfectly designed, but missing the oil that had kept everything running smoothly. The gears were starting to grind against each other, and the whole machine was beginning to shake itself apart. A full year had passed since the last human ship vanished from Council space, and the situation had become desperate. What had started as minor inconveniences had grown into a crisis that threatened the collapse of galactic civilization itself. Ambassador Zethkar, who had once proudly led the campaign to expel humanity, now found himself in the humiliating position of leading the search for the very people he had worked so hard to banish. His crystalline form moved restlessly around the emergency command center that had been hastily assembled in the council chambers. Report, he commanded, his voice carrying none of its former confidence. Captain Moldex of the search fleet stood at attention. We have investigated every known human colony, sir. Kepler 442b, Ross 128b, Proxima Centauri C, all the worlds where humans establish settlements. They are completely empty. Empty how? Zethkar demanded. Destroyed? Abandoned? Neither, sir. That's what makes it so strange. The colonies appear to have been carefully dismantled, buildings taken apart piece by piece, equipment removed, even the landscaping restored to natural conditions. It's as if the humans wanted to leave no trace they were ever there. Zethkar's internal lights flickered with frustration. They couldn't have just disappeared into space. Hundreds of billions of humans, thousands of ships, entire planetary populations. They have to be somewhere. We found this at every location, sir, Captain Moldex said, handing over a data pad. The same message, left in a simple beacon at each site. Zethkar read the message aloud. Thank you for your interest in human activities. We are currently exploring new opportunities beyond our previous operational parameters. We wish you well in your endeavors. For further information, please refer to coordinates 847.332.991. And those coordinates lead to what? Empty space, sir. Deep space, far beyond any known system. The search had been going on for months with the same results everywhere. Human colonies, research stations, trading posts, even small outposts on asteroid mining facilities, all carefully abandoned, all leaving the same polite but unhelpful message. Dr. Cathara entered the command center carrying her latest analysis. Her usual calm demeanor was replaced by obvious worry. "I've completed my study of the human evacuation pattern," she announced. "It's unlike anything in recorded galactic history." "Explain," Zethkar ordered. The coordination required was extraordinary. Every human settlement, no matter how remote, began evacuation at exactly the same time. They moved with a precision that suggests months or even years of advanced planning. But more importantly, they left no indication of their destination. She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy. Red dots marked former human locations, all now empty. Most species, when they relocate, leave some kind of trail. Supply movements, communications, scouting missions to new territories. The humans left nothing. It's as if they simply vanished. "But that's impossible," protested Captain Moldex. "You can't move entire populations without leaving traces." Dr. Cathera nodded grimly. "Unless they had been preparing secret destinations for a very long time, places we never knew about. The reality was more sophisticated than the Council could imagine. While they had been focused on their bureaucratic procedures and political maneuvering, humans had been quietly preparing for this possibility for decades. Far beyond the reach of Council space, in a region that most species considered too dangerous to explore, Admiral Yuna Kang stood on the observation deck of New Frontier, humanity's new capital world. The planet orbited an unstable star in a nebula that played havoc with most navigation systems. It was exactly the kind of place that other species would never think to look. "Admiral," her aide approached with the daily intelligence report. "We're intercepting more Council search transmissions. They're still looking in the wrong places." Yuna smiled as she watched the swirling nebula outside. The unstable radiation that made this system dangerous to other species actually provided excellent cover for human activities. And the constant environmental changes that would drive other species crazy were just another problem for humans to solve. "They're searching the safe systems," she told her aide. "The stable systems, the systems that make sense to them. They can't conceive that we might have chosen to go to places they consider uninhabitable." She was right. The Council search teams were investigating systems with stable stars, predictable orbits, and calm space conditions. They were looking for the kind of safe, organized environments that Council species preferred. They never thought to search the chaotic regions, the unstable systems, the dangerous territories that required constant adaptation to survive. "What about the other colonies?" her aide asked. "Hidden across 50 different systems that the Council has marked as too hazardous for settlement," Yuna replied. "Binary stars with fluctuating radiation, planets with unpredictable weather patterns, asteroid fields too dense for normal navigation, all the places that other species avoid because they require flexible thinking to survive." The humans had spent years secretly establishing colonies in these difficult regions. While other species saw dangerous obstacles, humans saw interesting challenges. Where others saw chaos that needed to be controlled, humans saw opportunities for creative solutions. Back in Council space, the search was becoming increasingly frantic. Economic collapse was accelerating. The Zephyrian Republic had announced its withdrawal from the Council, unable to maintain trade relationships without human intermediaries. Several other species were threatening to follow. "We need to expand the search," Zethkar declared. "Check every system within 100 light-years of former human territory." "Sir," Captain Moldex said hesitantly, "that would include many systems marked as hazardous or unsuitable for settlement. Check them anyway." But even as the search expanded, the Council searchers found themselves limited by their own nature. When they encountered unstable stellar phenomena, they turned back rather than risk their sophisticated ships. When they found systems with dangerous radiation or unpredictable conditions, they marked them as uninhabitable and moved on. They were looking for humans in places where Council species would choose to live. They never imagined that humans might have deliberately chosen to live in places where Council species could not follow. Meanwhile, across the hidden human colonies, life was thriving in ways that would have amazed the Council species. Humans were turning the dangerous, unpredictable environments into advantages. They were learning to use stellar radiation as an energy source. They were building cities that could adapt to changing planetary conditions. They were creating technologies that worked with chaos instead of against it. The Council was searching, for refugees. What they had actually created was a scattered civilization that was becoming more innovative and adaptable than ever before, and that civilization was growing stronger with each passing day, hidden in plain sight in all the places the Council considered too difficult to explore. 2 years after the human exodus, the Galactic Council was facing the complete collapse of everything they had built over thousands of years. Council Prime Velthara stood in what had once been the bustling central chamber of galactic government. Now most of the seats were empty. Representatives from dozens of species had simply stopped coming to meetings. Without the complex web of trade, cooperation, and mutual support that had held the galaxy together, many species were withdrawing into isolation. The final devastating blow came on a quiet morning when Ambassador Mordeth of the Zephyrian Republic requested an emergency session. Velthara knew what was coming, but she still felt her heart sink as the tall, graceful alien stepped to the central podium. "Fellow council members," Mordeth began, his melodic voice carrying easily through the mostly empty chamber. "The Zephyrian Republic must announce our formal withdrawal from the Galactic Council, effective immediately." A few gasps echoed from the remaining representatives. The Zephyrians had been founding members of the Council, one of its oldest and most respected civilizations. "We cannot remain part of an organization that expelled our closest partners," Mordeth continued. "The humans were not just our allies. They were the ones who made this entire council actually work. Without them, we are not a galactic civilization. We are just a collection of separate species talking past each other." His words hit like physical blows. Over the following days, other species began making similar announcements. The Altarian Commonwealth, the Centauri Federation, even some of the smaller client states that had been loyal to the hegemony for centuries. All of them were quietly distancing themselves from the Council. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. Every species that had worked closely with humans understood their value. Only the species that had treated humans as inferior were surprised by the collapse. Velthara found herself preparing for the most difficult speech of her political career. She stood before the nearly empty chambers, looking out at perhaps 30 representatives from what had once been a council of over 200 species. "Fellow beings," she began, her voice heavy with regret. "We must face a truth that many of us have been unwilling to acknowledge. We have made a catastrophic error." She paused, gathering her strength to continue. "We believed that humans were just another species among many. We failed to understand that they were the keystone species that held our entire civilization together." The remaining representatives listened in uncomfortable silence as she continued. "For decades, we saw humans as primitive, disorganized, and troublesome. We thought they were just workers who could be easily replaced. We were wrong, completely, utterly wrong." Dr. Kithara stepped forward to present her final report on the crisis. The data she shared was more devastating than anyone had imagined. "Humans were not the smartest species in our galaxy," she explained. "They were not the strongest or the most advanced or the most sophisticated, but they possessed something that no other species had, the ability to adapt to anything." She activated a holographic display showing the collapse of galactic systems over the past 2 years. "Look at what we have become without them. Our trade networks have shrunk by 70% because we lost the merchants who could communicate with anyone. Our technology fails constantly because we lost the technicians who could make incompatible systems work together. Our research has slowed to a crawl because we lost the scientists who could find creative solutions to unexpected problems." The truth was becoming impossible to deny. Humans had not been just another member species. They had been the living spirit of adaptation that allowed a diverse galaxy to function as one unified civilization. "We thought we were expelling a minor partner," Velthara continued. "Instead, we amputated the part of ourselves that made us capable of growth, of change, of meeting new challenges. We have reduced ourselves to a collection of specialized species that can only function under perfect conditions." She gestured to the empty seats around them. "When conditions are not perfect, we fail. When we face unexpected problems, we have no solutions. When we need to adapt to change, we are helpless." The council had spent months preparing a formal apology. They offered complete reinstatement of humanity's membership, full reparations for the forced evacuation, and a permanent seat on the ruling council with veto power over future decisions. They broadcast this message on all frequencies, translated into every known language, transmitted to every corner of known space. The response came 3 months later, from coordinates that led to a thriving human settlement in what the Council had always considered an impossibly dangerous nebula. The message was brief and polite, signed by Governor Yoon-hae Kim of the Independent Human Colonies. "Thank you for your kind offer," it read. "We appreciate the Council's change of perspective. However, we have found our new circumstances quite comfortable and productive. We have discovered that we work best in environments that encourage innovation and adaptation rather than rigid adherence to established procedures." The message continued, "We wish the Council well in your future endeavors. Should individual species wish to establish diplomatic or trade relationships with the independent human colonies, we would be happy to consider such arrangements on a case-by-case basis." It was signed, simply, "With respect for our shared history and hope for all our futures." The Council had learned the truth, but they had learned it too late. Humans had not simply been expelled from galactic civilization. They had been freed from the constraints that had limited their potential. Now they were out there somewhere, in the dangerous places that other species feared to explore, building something new. Something that embraced change instead of fighting it. Something that grew stronger through adaptation rather than weaker through rigidity. In the abandoned chambers of the Galactic Council, automated systems continued to run on protocols designed by species that had never learned to improvise. The displays still showed perfect procedures and optimal efficiency ratings, but the galaxy had become very quiet, very predictable, and very, very alone. Outside, in the dark spaces between the stars, humanity was writing a new chapter of galactic history, one that valued flexibility over perfection, solutions over procedures, and growth over stability. The Council had taught them a valuable lesson about the price of adaptation. Now humanity was free to adapt without limits.